Passport to the Past, making sense of the census. So this session is all about the census. Gemma's going to tell you all about it. It's a fantastic historical document. So first of all, what we normally do is a big welcome and all say hello to each other. So shall we have a go at doing that? So off mute, everybody. And after 3, 1, 2, 3. Hello!
Hello!
Hello, Rosa! No. How lovely to see you all. Phew, right. So, welcome. Lovely to see you. As I mute, when you're not talking, that helps us. We're recording the session as usual. So if you don't want to be on the recording, then just turn your camera off. If it's your parents' name on the screen, change it to your name. It's best if it's just your first name, but it doesn't matter if it's your whole name. Okay, so as usual, there are going to be a few things that you need because we've got some activities that go with the session. So hopefully you will have downloaded the Passport to the Past resources. If you haven't, some paper, some pencils, maybe some colouring pens, that kind of thing is going to be helpful. Okay, so I think we are pretty much ready to start. I'm going to hand you over to Gemma, who knows everything there is to know about the census, and she's going to tell you all about it and listen to what you've got to say as well. So we're a little bit late starting, but off we go.
Hello everybody, and thank you so much for your patience. So first of all, Happy New Year to you all, and I hope you all had a really nice Christmas. It's wonderful to see you. So as Kate was saying, thank you so much for your patience. So the way today's session is going to work is actually we're going to stop sort of halfway through and do an activity, and then we'll do the second half and then another activity at the end, and we'll see how we crack on with that. So as Kate said, I'm going to be telling you all about the census. So what we're basically aiming to find out about today is, first of all, we're going to be discovering how we find out about the past. Secondly, we're going to be understanding the census and seeing how we use them to find out about how people used to live. We're going to be thinking about something called the 1939 Register, which is an exciting historical document, which I'll tell you about a bit later on. And finally, we're going to be seeing how luck can play a massive part when finding out about the past. So welcome everybody, and let's get started. So first of all, why are we doing a session today on the census? Well, because the last census to be filled in by the British public actually took place last year in 2021, and it happens every single 10 years. And also because the 1921 census, so the one that came out 100 years ago, was filled in 100 years ago, is due to be released in 2022. So they always have 100 years between when a census is actually put out there to the public. That's to protect people's data. So the next one to come out will be the 1921. I should say at this point, if you do want to access things like the census yourself, if you want to do it free of charge, you can go to a library or to our archives where we're from today, and you can look at the censuses for free. But the 1921 one you won't be able to do for free for about 12 months. So just bear that in mind, but there's loads more you can find out about. We're also doing a session on the census because basically it's really interesting and we can learn loads about our own family and also about how people used to live. So gathered really helps the government examine how much they need to know how much food is needed to feed the whole of the population. And for example, if there was a war, you would want to know how many young men you have available to fight in such a war. And censuses go back thousands of years, and that strange document you can see just on the left-hand side, it's not appearing great on the camera, but it's very hard to read anyway. And that is a very old census that's about 1,000 years old. So what is the UK census, the United Kingdom census? Well, when we talk about the census today, we generally mean the official census started by the UK government in 1801. As I said, it's taken place every 10 years since then, the only exception being in 1941. This was when World War II was happening, so they decided not to do it. And for the first few years, the information gathered didn't actually include any personal information. But since 1841, the census has asked for personal information about everybody living in every household. So those are the ones that we're going to be looking at. And if you look at the images on the left-hand side, you can see the one at the bottom is one of the older ones, which is handwritten and fills up a page. And that one is from the 1800s. And the one above is the most, well, say the most recent. We just did one last year, but this one's the 2011 one. How did it work? Well, on a specific date, normally a Sunday, because that's when most people were actually in at home, every household would fill in a form which would be delivered by an enumerator. An enumerator is a very fancy way of describing the person who turned up at your house with the form to fill in, and then they would come back a few days later and pick it up. Sometimes they also had to help people fill it in, because especially in the past, people often couldn't read or write. And if you look at the picture on the left, that man in the nice bowler hat that you can see there, who's writing things down, that is the enumerator, and he's collecting information from a traveller family. The lights have just gone off here, so if I appear in the dark, then be for a moment. All technology is failing. So that's what an enumerator was. And each census since 1841 has been slightly different and asked different questions, but it usually asks for the names of people, the relationships with each other, the address they're living at, their ages, their marital status, whether they're married or not, and the job of those living in each house, flat or home in the UK. And it's important also to know that by households aren't always people who live in flats and homes. They could be people who are in hospital. They could be people who live in an orphanage. They could be travellers, so people who live in caravans, people who live on boats, including, for example, people in the Navy, for example. So when we say household, there are some traditional ones and there are some other types of households. And the last census took place on the 21st of March, 2021. And the census is extremely important when we're trying to find out about people. Now, what we're going to be doing is we're going to now have a look at some of these censuses. Now, when you first look at a census, and this one is one of the first ones from 1841, what you might be struck with initially is that there's a lot of information there, and it can be quite difficult to read because, as we know, some people's handwriting, like mine, is very difficult to read. But what we're going to do is we will break it down for you. We'll show you the important bits. So please don't worry too much. If you look at some of these images initially and think, oh, I can't really understand it, we will make sure that we break it down for you. So this is one of the first ones, and you can see that it is from 1841. Can anyone tell me where it is from? Can anyone see what the census, what the house is that the census is taking place in? It's a very, very famous house. In fact, it's not really a house, it's much bigger than that. Can anyone see? It is a bit tricky. It's on the top line, and it's actually Buckingham Palace. Does anybody know who lives in Buckingham Palace? Go on, Charlie.
The Queen.
The Queen. And does anybody happen to know who the Queen was in 1841? It was a queen, not a king. Seb, go on. Victoria, well done, spot on. Yes, it was Queen Victoria, thank you very much. And we can see a picture of her with her husband, Prince Albert. And there's another picture of her, and this picture is really important because not only does it show Queen Victoria and her first child, she had lots of children, but that was her first daughter. but also that is the first photograph ever taken of Queen Victoria. In fact, any king or queen, that's the first picture taken, because it was when she was on the throne that photography was invented. Before then, if you wanted an image of somebody, you had to draw it or paint it. So, and we'll see why photography is really important when finding out about the past as we go a bit later. So what can we learn from it? Well, what I've done, because I know the handwriting can be really difficult, is I've actually typed it up for you on this table, and I'm just going to give you a minute or two, just have a quick glance at it, and then what we'll do is we'll pull out some of the most important bits. Okay, can you all hear me again? We're a little bit worried that the quality of some of the images you're seeing aren't terribly clear. What we are going to be doing is making some of these a bit bigger, so hopefully that will help with it. Okay, so if we go to the next page, hopefully that's a bit clearer for you. So this is a snapshot into a single day at Buckingham Palace. The census return was filled in on the 6th of June 1841, and what we want to do is just see the sort of things that we could learn about Queen Victoria just by looking at something like this. First of all, you can tell that she's very wealthy and important because she has a lot of people working for her. In fact, almost everybody on that page, apart from her husband and her daughter, they're all people who are members of staff. We can also see that Queen Victoria, her daughter, and the Earl of Aboyne are listed by their titles rather than their names. And hopefully you can see that. Can everyone see that roughly? Okay, Seb, you're struggling. Ruth and Charlie, how are you getting on with it? You can see it. Josie, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. And Rosa? Okay, brilliant. I'm sorry, Seb. I'm just trying to think what might help. You could try switching your camera off. If it's, oh no, my colleague's saying that probably wouldn't help. Well, let's see how we go along, and hopefully it might get a bit clearer. Depending on which census we're looking at, some of them are clearer than others, no doubt. So we'll carry on anyway. You'll also notice on the census that he abbreviated words. Now, we often think, being people who use mobile phones, that we invented abbreviations and shortening things, but actually people have been doing this for a long time. And for example, there we can see a bit that I pulled out, which says HRH Prince Albert, and that stands for His Royal Highness. We've also got this other one. This is a member of their staff. This is George Thomas Keppel, and you can see that Thomas has been shortened, so it's just THO with a little s at the top. We can also see other things. The blue arrows point out people who are from foreign parts, so in other words, anyone who is outside England and Wales. I was going to say the United Kingdom, but you'll notice there's an S there for Scotland as well. Now, Prince Albert himself was German, and he brought German staff with him. So that's why there are so many people there who are listed as being from foreign parts. And there's an example. We have Charles Bender, who's 20 years old, and he is Jaeger to the HRH Prince Albert, His Royal Highness. And for those of you who haven't heard of this before, a Jaeger is actually a huntsman. It's somebody who goes out hunting, and the royal family still hunt today. Okay, so we're now going to stop for a few minutes with the first activity. So what you're going to be needing for this activity is a piece of paper, a pen or pencil, and if you have it, some colours might be useful depending on which activity you go for. If you've already printed out the pages, then you'll see the 2 pages that you need in front of you. So what we'd now like to do is just give you a few minutes to have a go at creating your own census for today's date. So it's the 5th of January 2022. You can do it one of 2 ways. You can either, as Rose has got in front of her, you can use the table, you can fill in the date and all the people who are either living in or staying at your house. So if you've got a friend staying over, you would include them as well. So you can fill the names in. Or if you're feeling a bit more creative, you can instead go for drawing a picture of your house and then drawing all the people in that house. And don't forget to label them so you know who everybody is. Okay? Has anyone got any questions? Seb? Can you hear me?
What does occupation mean?
Oh, Seb, I couldn't quite hear you. Do you want to say that again?
What does this occupation
I can't hear what. Can you hear?
What
Seb,
does
do you
the
want to...
occupation mean?
Ah, okay. An occupation is what job you do. So because if you were putting yourself down, you would put pupil or something like that, or goes to school. If you have someone who is too young to be at school, just leave that blank. And Ruth, you've got a question?
What do you put in the first square box and the second square box?
Okay, so the one at the top where it says name of the institution, you pop your address in there, okay? And if I were you, I'd just put the town that you're in or the village. I wouldn't put the full address in. And then in the first box, you've got the names of all the people. And then you can see it says age of males, age of females. So if you were putting in, for example, me, you would just put in females, you would put 42, nearly 43. And then you've got, like I said, the jobs and the bit on the outside is where you can note down if people are from foreign parts. So, for example, you know, if you've got somebody staying who's visiting from France, for example, you would pop a little f in there. Does that make sense? Okay, so welcome back everybody. If you're still working on the task, I can see some of you have finished and some of you aren't. Please carry on ahead and just listen in. Or you can leave it and finish it later on. So what we're now going to do is show you how useful censuses can be. And what we're going to do is we're going to use them to tell you the story of a real woman. This isn't someone I've made up. This is a lady called Mary. And I'm going to show you how we can find out all about her life just by looking at the censuses, and at the end a little bit of help from some other stuff as well. So first of all, we're going to start off with Mary on the first census. This is in 1871. Now, if you're looking at that screen and thinking, oh, I can't read it, don't worry. On the next page, we will blow up the bits that are important and we'll highlight them as well. So here it is, the bit that we want to see on the 1871 census. So first of all, you can see Mary, I've always underlined her in yellow, which is good because her mother was named Mary as well, so we don't want to get them muddled up. So on the 1871 census, you can see Mary, and she is 3 years old. Can we all see that? And you can see that they've abbreviated, they've shortened the word daughter next to her name. She's called Mary Robinson at this point, though that will change. And they've put daughter DAU next to it. We can see that her parents are James White Robinson and Mary Elizabeth Robinson. And we can see her father is a farmer who employs 4 men and 3 boys. And that probably means that they're quite a wealthy farm because he's obviously employing 7 people. And Mary has 2 younger sisters, Margaret and Edith Maria. They live at Chadstone Lodge, which is in Northamptonshire. And they have 2 servants. And again, knowing that they employ people probably means that they're quite wealthy. So we're now going to jump ahead 10 years to 1881. Now on this page, there's actually more than one family. So there's the bit that we're going to be looking at. That's the bit for Mary's family. And there it is blown up. And here Mary is now 13 years old and she is unmarried. And you can see next to her name, Mary, is the letters DO, which means ditto, which means the same as above. And it was a way for the person filling out the form to not have to keep writing out the same words, in this case, her surname Robinson. And next to it, again, you can see the first few letters of daughter and then the first few letters of unmarried. And she's still living with her parents, but they have moved to a different farm called Waterfall Farm, which is still in Northamptonshire. And her father is still listed as a farmer. Mary and her siblings, that's her brothers and sisters, are listed as scholars, which is an old-fashioned way of saying pupils. So they went to school or were privately tutored. And you can see underneath that they have a governess/teacher and also a servant. Now, the fact they have a governess probably means that they are being taught at home. Again, it probably points to them being wealthy that they have 2 servants. So now we're going to jump ahead again. This time it's 1891. And that's the little bit that we're looking at. Again, the other people on that page would have been their neighbours. So it's only the bit in the red box we want to see, which is there. Now, on the 1891 census for Mary, she is now 23 years old. And she's still living at Waterfall Farm with her parents, James and Mary. She is living with 4 brothers and sisters, Edith Maria, James, Ethel Sargent and Louisa Mary. So where do you think Margaret and Catherine have gone? So since the last census, 2 of her sisters, Margaret and Catherine, have dropped off the list. So can anyone suggest where they might have gone to? Rosa, go ahead.
They might have gone to live in another house with if they've got married.
Fantastic. And I think that is the most likely suggestion, Rosa. Of course, people did get married quite young, so I think that probably is what's happened, but we don't know. There's always mysteries when we look at this kind of thing. Other options could be they might be visiting friends. they might be in hospital, or, and we really hope not, but they could have died. And you can see that Mary isn't listed as employed. You can see where the blue arrow is, there's nothing written down. But it probably means that they are still doing some stuff. I mean, as in she was playing a part in the farm, but perhaps not listed as that on here. And little seems to have changed, but remember that a census return only tells you so much information. So even though since the last census it looks like very little have changed, she might have fallen in love. She might have learnt something really exciting. She might have gone on a really great adventure. But that's unfortunately not the sort of information that's captured in this kind of record. Can you think what you could do in order to record things that are exciting that happen in your life? What might you do to record them? Go on, Seb.
Down on a paper.
Oh, write it down on paper. Sorry, Seb. Yeah, exactly. So you could keep a diary or write a story. Brilliant. So that's exactly what you could do. Okay, so we're now going to jump ahead 10 more years. It's now 1901. And there's the little bit that we're looking at. So that there is Mary's household. And we're going to find out that a lot's changed for Mary. She's now 34 years old. And you can see next to her name, it's listed wife. She is now married to a man called John Riddy. He is aged 37 and he is a bank manager. Sorry, I'm laughing because the light's gone off again. It will be back. She's now moved to London. Mary now has her own family of 3 children, and they're called Edith, Mary, John and Cicely, which I think is a really lovely name. And you can see those just there. And they also have 2 servants. So we're just going to move away from the census for the moment. And I just want to show you the listing for Mary and John's wedding. So at the time, if you got married, and this still happens, and you got married in a church, you would fill out a register. And that's what's happened here. So this is a page from a register in a church. And you can see there are 2 weddings on here, one of which is Mary's. And there it is, and you can see the bit with Mary in it. And you can see that when she married John Riddy, he was a bank clerk, not a bank manager, as he is later on. And they got married in 1892, 9 years before the last census, which is why so much has changed. And a lot has changed, hasn't it? And finally, you can see that Mary has signed her name there, which I think is a really nice touch. And then we're just going to have a look at this one. So this is now 1911, so 10 years later. And John is listed along with 2 servants. And this is probably his neat handwriting that we're looking at. And you'll notice on the right-hand side that since 1871, there's been a column for disabilities. And I'm just going to read you how it's worded. Be interesting to see what you think of this. It says, if any person included in the schedule is, firstly, totally deaf or deaf and dumb, totally blind, lunatic, imbecile or feeble-minded. Do you think we'd use that kind of language now? I think if we called somebody a lunatic today, go on, Seb. And Daniel, absolutely, you're right. Go on, Seb.
No.
No, it would be considered really insulting language, wouldn't it? So we certainly wouldn't call someone a lunatic or feeble-minded, but at the time that was how they described people with different disabilities. And you can see on this that John is now living on the High Street in Moreton in Marsh, which is a really lovely Cotswold village in Gloucestershire. But there's no Mary, is there? So can anyone think where Mary has gone? Why isn't Mary on here? What do you think might have happened to her? Go on, Josie.
There we go.
She's died.
Okay, so she might have died. Yeah, absolutely. That is a very good idea. Seb, what did you think? Oh, Seb, sorry, say that again. Seb, do you want to pop it into the chat facility? I can't quite hear you. Oh, yeah, absolutely. You'll be glad to know, Seb, that they didn't behead people by this point. They had stopped not very long ago, but a little bit longer ago. So yeah, that's a really good one. In fact, I'm relieved to tell you all that she wasn't dead at this point, because very luckily for us, we found her on somebody else's census. So can you just see her there? And if I just blow that up a little bit bigger, you can see she is at a different household on the date of the census, and that she was with her 12-year-old daughter Cicely, and they were visitors to a house in Lincolnshire. And you can see that they were visiting an Elizabeth Dunkley and her daughter Catherine, but we have no idea who they were. Were they family or friends? Sometimes we just don't know. And sometimes it is hard to find people on the census. Sometimes they were deliberately missed off or by accident, or the information was wrong. And in fact, the artist Turner that we see there in that portrait looking very dapper, he actually didn't want his data to be written down on the census. So he rode into the middle of the River Thames so he didn't have to fill out a form. And if you think about today, there are people, aren't there, who don't like to go on social media or put any personal information on the internet, and that is for very much the same reasons as Turner didn't want his information out there. And sometimes names are wrong, or they used a nickname or a middle name, or it's just written wrongly. And when I was first doing family history, I thought my one grandmother was called Mary, like our Mary here, but it turned out that was her middle name. Her real name was Ada, and I had no idea. So sometimes we have to talk to family as well in order to find things out. And sometimes paperwork is lost. The entire 1931 census was lost in a fire during World War II. Now, normally this is where our story of Mary would stop, because after 1911, we can't go any further with the censuses, because they have to be older than 100 years for us to be able to look at them. And that's because people who are still alive don't want their data to be put out there. But luckily for us, we had two good pieces of luck. The first one is something called the 1939 Register, and the second bit of luck was an album we've stored in Gloucestershire Archives. So first of all, the 1939 Register. Does anybody know what massive global event started in 1939? Does anybody know? Go on, Charlie. I think I saw you. I think I lip read that. I think you were right.
World War II.
World War II. Yeah, exactly, Ruth. Exactly. World War II, precisely. And so at the start of the war, the government needed to know how many people could go off to fight and who could produce food and all these kinds of things. So what they did was they had a census put together. And the one you can see in front of you is the one that has Mary Riddy on it. Now, if you've got black lines across, can you see that? It says that the record is officially closed. Does anybody know why they might want to blank out people's names? Because behind each of those black lines, there's a person. So why would they get rid of them? Go on, Charlie, have a go. This is a difficult one.
Maybe they wanted to have their name kept secret or something.
Yeah, I actually think you've pretty much got the nail on the head there. Yeah, those people are probably still alive, Charlie, so they wouldn't want their information to be out there. So that's why they're blacked out. And when those people pass away, they will take that line away so that we can read it. So that's the bit that shows Mary's household. And in 1939, it's been so many years since the last census we looked at. She's now 72 years old. And she's still living at the house called the Steps in Moreton in Marsh. And she's living with her daughter Cicely, who's now married to a vicar called Reginald. And you can see that there is a lady called Eleanor, who's a retired school principal, who's either visiting or living there, but we don't know anything about who she is. And we can see that Cicely is in the women's voluntary service. Now, it's very easy to think that in war, it's men who do all the important stuff. But actually, women had a really big role as well. And in the women's voluntary service, during World War II, they looked out for fires from bombs that were dropped. They cared for the injured. They took refreshments to the air raid shelters. They distributed food, clothing, blankets, and ration books. We'll look at one of those in a moment. So they did a really important job. But you'll notice there is no John in it, so her husband isn't listed. So for the last time, where do you think John might be? Why isn't he on this census? Seb, you were definitely there first.
You said he might have died.
Oh, did you say he might have died? Yeah, okay, so he might have died. Does anyone else have any other ideas? Charlie?
He wasn't living in the same household as Mary anymore.
Maybe they've got divorced. Maybe they've separated. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay, so we're going to find out what actually happened to him. But first of all, before we get to the mystery of what has happened to John, we want to show you this final brilliant bit of luck, which is this album. Now, in our archives, we have 12 million items just like this. And we were hunting through some information and we found this, and we found that it was filled with stuff all about Mary Riddy and her family. So my colleague Kate is now going to show you what's inside. And this is why it's important. Although today we're talking a lot about censuses, that's why it's also important to have other types of records too. And you can see that this album is filled with photographs. It's filled with local postcards of mainly Moreton in Marsh, but other places too. We can see the inside of churches, tea rooms, families. And on the page that Kate has just stopped on, we can see something that perhaps is really exciting, which is we can see photographs of Mary herself. And if you look at the right-hand page and you see that lady with the white or greyish hair, that is Mary Riddy, who we've been learning about. And that man with the very nice moustache, that is her husband, John. And I'm now going to show you. Ooh, Kate, did you just want to show them the ration book?
Oh, yes.
I think it's at the front. So also in here, really fantastically, we have a couple of World War II items. And this is a ration book. So during World War II, there wasn't enough food for everyone to just eat what they wanted. So things like butter and bacon and sweets had to be rationed, and you had books with stamps in them so that you didn't eat too much. And then there's also an ID card in there, which was also at the time, not many people had passports, but security was very important because people might be spies, they might be coming and trying to make us lose the war. So that's why everyone had to carry identity cards. Thank you, Kate, that's brilliant. We're now just going to have a little closer look at those pictures. So here we have Mary and John Riddy, and this is my favourite picture because she looks so happy, doesn't she? It's a very romantic picture. And the middle one, we can see her husband John, who's standing outside the front of their house, the Steps in Moreton in Marsh. And now we probably know, don't we, why it's called the Steps, because it has these beautiful steps out the front. And so photographs can fill a gap sometimes that a census really can't. And you can also see them playing tennis, can't you? Can anyone think what it might tell us about them, the fact that they have a tennis court in their back garden? Go on, Jaycee.
Yeah.
They like playing tennis.
Well, absolutely, yes. So they like playing tennis. Who doesn't? Go on, Ruth.
I think it's because maybe tennis games were held there.
Ooh, that's interesting. Oh, I can see that Daniel has said that they are wealthy. And that was probably the thing I was most getting at. But yes, all the other things are true as well. Most people don't have a tennis court in their garden. Unfortunately, I'd like one myself.
Gemma, Seb is asking
oh,
if
yes.
people went to jail if they didn't fill in the census.
That's a really good question. Today, you can be charged £1,000 if you fail to fill in the census. But I was having a look and I found out that the last time that this happened in 2011, I know there was one last year, but they haven't finished putting it together yet. But in 2011, only a few people were actually charged with not filling out the census. So you could be charged that much, but not many people were. But it is a law, it's a legal requirement. It's not just them saying, please, can you do this? Okay, very good question. And here we just have a few more pictures to show you. So we've mentioned Cicely quite a lot, and you can see her in the top and bottom pictures on the left in front of the plane there. You can also see their other daughter, Edith Mary. Now, she was a nurse in 1914 to 1918, so that's the First World War. In fact, sorry, I put World War II, I meant World War I there. And you can also see her in the most fantastic wedding dress, which down below when she married George Deacon. And on the right, you can see Mary and John with their son, also called John after his father. And you can see that he's wearing an army uniform. And if I didn't know what I'm about to show you, I might think that picture had been taken in World War II, and that's why he's in an army uniform. But what I'm going to show you now is going to prove that it couldn't possibly have been taken in World War II. And oh, just before we get to that, these are Mary's grandchildren, Anthony and Joyce. And I just wanted to show you them because that lovely little girl there with the dog, she's the one who put this album together. And she very helpfully wrote everybody's names on the backs of the pictures as well. So we love Joyce because she's very, very organised. And you should try and do this yourself one day. And we've had a look at those. So we still don't know where John is on the 1939 register, but this newspaper article that was tucked into the album actually gives us the answer. And we'll just blow up a little bit of it. And if you look at the bit in yellow, you see that this newspaper article is about the marriage of their daughter Cicely that we mentioned. And you can see that she's described as the young daughter of the late Mr. J. A. Riddy, and late means that he not only died, but that he died very recently. And if you look at the date, it's the start of, right at the beginning of 1939, so before World War II started. So we know that picture, their son couldn't possibly have been in World War II then, because his father had died by the time it broke out. So very sad, but there you go. And there's just a picture of them blown up, because don't they look lovely? Right, thank you so much for listening so hard. It's quite complicated looking at censuses, but I hope I've at least tried to show you how you can find out such a great deal. We're now going to pass over to Kate, and Kate's going to tell you about a couple of activities you can do, but we're not going to actually do them with you. If you have
a couple of things that we have here. The family tree idea is one that we had because a family tree is an old idea of recording family relationships with each other. But these days, families can be a little bit more complicated than they used to be in the past. It's much more common, for example, for people to get divorced now than they used to, and for people to have different families so that parents can get divorced and then they can perhaps marry somebody else and have children with their new husband or wife. So families are more complicated perhaps than they were in the past. And also we wanted to give you an opportunity to record the people who are important to you in your life, who might not necessarily be people who are related to you. So I've done a little example of my own important people tree, and I've got my lovely dog on there. I've got Ruby Dog on there because Ruby Dog is really important to me, and even though she died a few years ago, I still think about her every day. And I've got my lovely auntie and uncle on there. I've got my best friends who I've been friends with for 40 years, that's Chaz and Bex. So it's a way of putting down people who are important in your life. And the other activity we thought that's putting in date order things that have happened during your lifetime. So if you start your timeline on the day you were born, so say if you were born on the 1st of January 2011, that would be the start of your timeline. And you can take it up to today's date, or you can take it on into the future if you want to. And you can put the important things that have happened to you personally. So Gemma's done hers, and you can see that she's put when she got mumps, when she broke her leg, but also things that have happened in the world. So you might put in March 2020, that's when, what happened in March 2020 that's had a massive impact for everybody? Rosa, do you know? Josie knows, Seb knows. So it's something that's still going on. It's something that means that we have to wear masks sometimes. Yeah, Rosa?
COVID-19.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, wasn't it? So that's probably quite an important date in all your lives. But there might be other things. Maybe you got a prize at school. Maybe you went on a very exciting holiday. So you can put those on your timeline, and you can also put big things that happened in the world. So for example, this year is going to be the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, isn't it? So that's, the Queen has been on the throne for 70 years this year. So we're not going to give you time for doing these now, because we want to make sure that you've got time to ask any questions you might have. I just want to quickly tell you about what we're doing next time, which is all about important buildings in Gloucestershire. And we're doing another drawing session. We've got a fantastic artist, Jamie, who's going to come and show and teach us all how to do good drawings of buildings. We've got somebody who is the archivist at Gloucester Cathedral, going to tell us a little bit about the history of Gloucester Cathedral, and another person who's an archivist at one of the big castles in Gloucestershire is going to tell us about that. So we really hope that you'll all be able to join us for that. So has anybody got any questions about today before we finish? Charlie's, did you want to ask something?
It's not really about today, but when is the next?
Oh, good question.
Festival?
It's on Wednesday, so they were always on a Wednesday at 4 o'clock, and it's the 2nd of February, so the first Wednesday in February, which is the 2nd of February. So please come and join us for that. Anybody else got anything they want to ask? So shall we say a big goodbye to everybody then? Are we all ready? So 1, 2, 3. Bye, everybody.
Bye. See you
Lovely
next
to see you
time.
all.
Bye.
Bye.